Welcome to day 2 of our series of the 101 hamstring. Today, what is a proximal hamstring and what's a proximal hamstring avulsion? If you are hearing words like proximal, avulsion and retraction and all you really want to know is what tore and why it feels so wrong, stay with me. So today, I'll walk you through and we'll repeat a little bit where this injury sits, how it usually happens and what's actually damaged, so you can go from my leg is ruined to I know what failed and what that means. This is day 2 out of 6, and you can watch this video as a standalone or you can decide to watch the whole series. When people say hamstring, they often imagine one big muscle. But in reality, your hamstring is a team of 3 muscles, each with its own tendon and all working together. So they help you bend the knee and help you extend the hip. All tendons start from the same place. They start at a bony point at your pelvis called the ischial tuberosity or sitting bone. And from there they run down at the back of your thigh and attach around your knee. The 3 main tendons are the semimembranosus, the semitendinosus, and the biceps femoris. And the long head of the biceps femoris is the one that attaches at the pelvis too. The short one doesn't. So the last 2 usually share a so-called conjoint tendon, the semitendinosus and the biceps femoris long head. And altogether, they produce and control powerful movements like sprinting, jumping, kicking, or acceleration and deceleration. And in other words, they are central to the kind of engine that most athletes really rely on. Now again, what does proximal mean? Proximal means it's closer to the center of your body instead of distal, which would be farther away. So the proximal hamstring is the top part of the hamstrings where the tendons attach to the pelvis. And the muscle belly in the middle, that's not the area and also not the attachment near the knees, only the top. So that specific tendon to bone zone is where a proximal hamstring rupture or avulsion happens. Now let's talk about the rupture versus avulsion again. A rupture means the tendon itself has torn, and avulsion means the tendon has been pulled completely off the bone at the sitting bone. In a proximal hamstring injury, 1, 2, or all of the 3 tendons can be involved. And this is different from a classic hamstring strain, which usually happens lower down in the muscle belly or at the muscle tendon junction in the middle of the thigh, or closer to the middle of the thigh. So how this lands on your identity? As you read about tendons and a lot of Latin names and attachment points, it's very normal that you feel, why should I even want to know this? I just want to know if it's going to be okay and when. And just give me a plan and not a textbook about this. It makes sense to think that way, but when you're hurt and under pressure, your brain wants certainty and action and not anatomy. But here's why it matters, that you know it for your identity and not only for the vocabulary. You've built who you are around what your body can do. And when part of that system suddenly fails and your brain tends to globalize it, if the hamstring failed, maybe I'm not even an athlete and not an athlete that I thought I was. And the basic picture of what actually tore turns a vague fear of my leg is ruined into a specific problem. 1 or more tendons have let go of the attachment. That's just more specific. And that's the first step from I am broken toward I have a serious specific injury and I can learn what to do next, and it is most likely fixable. And that's the first step from being broken. So you do not need to become a doctor, but knowing the difference between a muscle strain and a proximal tendon to bone injury at the pelvis is what will let you understand your MRI reports, what the surgeons talk about, the rehab plans you have to do, and to become patient for it. And that's identity repair at a very simple level. So moving from, I don't know why this happened to me, to I can name what happened even if I don't like it. So how does this injury usually happen? A proximal hamstring rupture or avulsion usually does not come from a slow, gradual overuse. It tends to happen in a single, high-force moment. The typical situation combines a hip bending forward and the knee being almost straight at the same time. And while the hamstring is trying to slow the movement down, this is called eccentric loading. The muscle is lengthening under tension and it places very high stress on the hamstring tendons at their attachment at the pelvis. So the common injury situations that athletes and active patients often describe is during sprinting or strong acceleration, sudden stopping or cutting, jumping or landing, or slipping, stumbling, or falling forward uncontrolled. More specific, imagine someone falling into a split and trying to force it not to happen. That is a classic injury mechanism. Or someone jumping over a hurdle and pushing the leg back. So many people remember that there was a sudden pop or a tearing feeling high at the back of their thigh or deep in the buttock area, followed by sharp pain, weakness, and difficulty to continue the activity. Some don't feel this at all, but it's most of the time. And because this happens at the tendon's attachment to the bone, it often feels more sudden and dramatic than a typical mid-thigh muscle strain. Not every story is like in the textbook, like I said, but some athletes do not remember a clear pop. They just notice loss of function over the next days, difficulty sitting, and a different, deeper kind of pain that they've had with previous strains. Now, how does your brain respond and how do you protect your identity? When you read how this injury usually happens, it's easy to drop into replay mode. If I'd landed differently, if I hadn't done this additional training that day, or if I warmed up longer, or you answer with guilt and self-blame. I should have been stronger, smarter, or more careful. Or you will feel frustration and anger at your body. I did everything right. Why did this give out now? So this comes from the same part of you that made you so good in your sport. You take responsibility, you analyze your mistakes, you try to control the outcomes. The downside is that when something goes wrong, your brain often goes straight to, it's my fault, I am the problem. So if we add this to our culture where we always say push through pain, there are no excuses, especially in the sport world, then it can feel like you missed a warning sign. Even if the mechanism was a split-second overload, no one could have realistically corrected in real time. Of course, we also have to take into account that there are chronic processes, but they are not always felt and not always known. The medical reality is this injury happens in high-demand movements with very high force and timing demands on the tendon, and where it is that instant, and where in that instance the load exceeded what the tendon could actually handle. So that doesn't erase the role of context over time, things like accumulated fatigue, chronic overload, sleep, nutrition and recovery habits, training structure and scheduling. These factors can influence how much margin your tissue has on any given day. So we can say two things at the same time. In that moment, this was a mechanical failure under load, but in the bigger picture, there may be load, recovery, and lifestyle factors worth learning from this for the future. So what matters for your identity is how you interpret this. It is not, I tore my hamstring off the bone because I'm weak, stupid, or careless. It should become, in a very demanding situation, my tendon failed mechanically on top of everything I was already carrying. My job now is to handle the rehab chapter well and later to look honestly at my training and recovery so I do not repeat the same patterns. So going over the injury moment 100 times won't change this, but using the same honesty and discipline you brought to the training, first for rehab and later how you train, recover, and organize your load will change what happens next. So that's identity repair, separating who you are from what happened while still being willing to learn from the context that led up to it. Let's talk about what is actually injured. Not all hamstring injuries are created equally. What makes a proximal hamstring rupture or avulsion different? It's first what tissue is injured, muscle versus tendon, and also where it happened, mid-thigh versus top attachment point. Muscle versus tendon means a typical hamstring strain usually affects the muscle-tendon junction in the broad middle of the thigh, and these often heal with rest and structured rehab. And a proximal hamstring rupture or avulsion involves the tendon that connects to the hamstring muscles to the pelvic bone at the sitting bone. Tendons heal different from muscles, especially when they are torn away from the bone, they usually need a lot of protection, need a long time to heal, and sometimes they need surgical reattachment depending on the pattern. Now, partial tears versus complete avulsions are also different. Proximal hamstring injuries can vary from partial tears, meaning some tendon fibers are still attached to the bone, to complete avulsions, meaning the tendon has pulled completely off the sitting bone. And then 1, 2, or all 3 of the hamstring tendons can be involved. In general, the more tendons detached, the more impact and strength and function loss you will feel. Now, why does the retraction matter? When the tendons pull away from the bone, it often moves toward the thigh, and this is called retraction. And retraction matters because the tendon is no longer where it's supposed to be, near the sitting bone, and healing back to the bone becomes less predictable the farther it is away, obviously, and also scar tissue can form between the tendon and also nearby structures. And in some patterns, the tendon may lie close to the important nerves, contributing to pain, altered sensation, and weakness. So those MRI phrases like 3 tendon avulsion with 4 cm retraction are obviously not a moral judgment. They're mechanical descriptions that help your team think clearly about the options that make sense for you. How this feels and how to move from fear to participation. So hearing about tendon tears, attachment to bone, and retraction can easily trigger your fear. The tendon has moved away from the bone. What does that even look like? Is it just hanging there somewhere? Loss of control, like you can't see or directly feel what's going on. You're relying on scans, reports, and surgeons' explanations in a very new language instead of knowing what exactly is happening in your leg. And catastrophic thinking, like a few late-night searches about retraction and scar tissue can quickly become my leg is ruined forever in your mind. As an athlete, you're usually used to reading your body very well, adjusting quickly, and seeing immediate feedback from training. And with this injury, a lot of the important information is always invisible and interpreted by other people. So that loss of direct feedback is destabilizing and can make you feel that everything is happening to you. Identity repair here is about moving from I'm helpless and don't know what's going on to understanding enough of what's injured and why the numbers matter, so you can follow the logic of the recommendations and take part in decisions. You don't need to like the situation particularly, probably no one does, but you don't have to be blind inside of it either. So when we talk about retractions, we are describing how far the torn tendon end has moved from its original attachment at the bone. And that measurement, for example, 1 to 2 cm or 4 to 5 cm or even more, is one of the factors that a surgeon will look at and discuss whether surgery is reasonable and when it makes sense. And retraction itself is not the whole story and not the end of your story. If surgery is chosen, the whole point is to bring the tendon back to bone and hold it while your body does the biological healing. If a conservative path is chosen, understanding your specific pattern helps set realistic expectations for strength, function, and time. So you're not just the passenger here. The more clearly you understand what is injured, the easier it becomes for you to ask focused questions, understand why your team recommends what they do, and see yourself as an active part of the process instead of just the injured leg in the room. And that's the beginning of repairing not only the tendon-bone connection, but also the connection between who you are as an athlete before that injury and who you are in this recovery phase and who you can still become afterwards. So now that you know what actually tore, how it usually happens and why it feels so different, next step for you could be, if you are already worrying about surgery versus rehab, to start reading the so-called UPHAB guide, Understanding Proximal Hamstring Ruptures and Avulsion guide. Then if you want to just understand where you are on the whole pathway, you can read the FAB guide, the Proximal Hamstring Avulsion guide. And if you just like to hear from other athletes and just exchange with others, you can join the free Athlete Transition Lab community, so you're not doing this all by yourself. All the links you will find below. And if you're ready for the third episode, make sure to check day 3. I will help and support you on your journey in your hamstring recovery because I take it serious.